I am taking a step back from like getting really insular about American politics. Yes, I'm always going to talk about wars and big broad stroke things, obviously, because it matters to everybody. It affects me and you and it affects the whole world. But like maybe thinking a little bit less about these specific congressional races and stuff, except if I do feel like it's pertinent to any other country and anyone that's trying to work within this political system in like a more progressive way. I did want to talk a little bit about Kat Abugazale because I've talked to Kat Abugazale before on my former podcast. And I think it's worth getting into this because this is like when we talk about like a young progressive person getting involved in the political system, and this we have this idea that like this is how we kind of can change things. But I think her specifically, her foreign policy views, which came under a lot of scrutiny over the last couple of weeks, are the exact example of how this whole idea of like a more progressive foreign policy is it's a loser scenario. And like, again, I've spoken to Kat. I think she's a very nice person. But I did think her foreign policy positions that were being outlined on her website were bizarre. And the more she tried to deal with the reaction to that, the worse everything got. I think any progressive person that's talking about like foreign policy or this stuff, when they take this position that like we must, in the name of self-determination, send arms to Ukraine, no matter what, even though some of these people we're sending arms to in Ukraine are bad and nasty and they're neo-Nazis and all kinds of bad people, doesn't matter. They're under attack. Their sovereignty's under attack. So we've got to look away from like whatever red flags are. We got to send them the weapons that they need to protect their sovereignty when they're being invaded in this way. And if it comes down to it, we need to do the same to Taiwan. We need to actually go further than like what current policy is on this. And we need to fully commit to arming Taiwan. Someone that does believe this could at least be consistent. If you say we must arm Ukraine because they're being invaded by Russia, we must arm Taiwan if it comes down to Taiwan being invaded or encircled or brought into the fold in China. We must arm Taiwan. We're going to use diplomacy to try and prevent that from happening. But if it comes down to it, we're going to ignore the one China policy. We're going to arm Taiwan to ensure that they can defend themselves from this invasion. And when it comes to Palestine, all of a sudden, this need to arm the people to protect their sovereignty and their right to self-determination just evaporates into the wind. I find it really kind of perplexing. Not only that, but you're like, Hamas can have nothing to do with being in leadership in Gaza anymore. Hamas must go. Arm the Ukrainians, arm the Taiwanese, and when it comes to Palestine, I just agree with nonviolence and talking things out and diplomacy and ensuring actually that the only people that are doing the fighting aren't part of that process at all. Not only are we not arming them, we're saying they got to go. They can't be part of this society at all in any way. That's what passes for progressive foreign policy. Like, I'm sorry, no matter what your stances are on like healthcare or like taxes or any of these issues that we could talk about like on the left in terms of like economic policy, if that's your position on foreign policy, you sound like a fucking loser. And I'm not going to get too upset when that blows up in your face. Her position, if implemented, would be the same as Trump Gaza plan. No, but she wants to she was like, we need to get the NED involved. We need to get we need to refund the NED and get them involved with Gaza in this peacetime process and ensure that Hamas disarms and is completely excised from all political life. It sucks. It sucks. That's what progressive foreign policy is. And this is the fundamental thing that people are not getting, is that it's incoherent. It's completely incoherent to say, I support arming Ukraine so they can protect their right of self-determination, and they're being invaded, so we got to send them weapons to defend themselves. I support arming Taiwan. And again, I'm not trying to attack Kat Abugazale. I've talked to her before. I actually think she's a very nice person and probably has a lot of views that I agree with. But we got to call this out. And people that are going to talk about and try to enter the political world as progressives and want to position themselves as having this like progressive foreign policy, AOC was just in Munich talking about this kind of progressive foreign policy vision as well. And she couldn't answer this basic question about Taiwan either when she was asked that question. And if you want to say, I want to support Ukraine by sending Ukraine weapons to defend themselves when they're being invaded, and I want to support the people of Taiwan if it comes down to it. And then when it comes to Palestinians, all of a sudden it's just like, I believe in this nonviolent tradition. I believe in like Gandhi and Martin Luther King, and Palestinians should only be nonviolent. That is totally incoherent. And like what Katabughazadeh is saying is not even that like it should be nonviolent, but that the only group that's been engaging in armed resistance should have no say whatsoever in this like post-war, post-peace deal, post-ceasefire Palestinian situation. Like that just does not make sense. Like, again, I don't agree with all this shit about Ukraine and pretending the last 15 years didn't happen and supporting NATO. I think if you're on the left, supporting NATO is a non-starter. If you're on the left, no, you don't support NATO. You don't support NATO arming proxy armies. Easy, right? Or about Taiwan, no, I don't support arming the people of Taiwan. That's not our fucking business. Taiwan is part of China. No, I don't support arming them. But if you are going to say those things, if you are going to say, no, we should support Ukraine, we should support Taiwan for these reasons, for the reason of self-determination and being invaded and all this stuff, you can't then say, when it comes to Palestinians, I don't support any of this. Not only should we not send them arms, I don't support anyone sending them arms. I don't support any kind of armed resistance whatsoever. That's completely incoherent and it doesn't make sense. Not to mention the obvious argument is that the Palestinians tried nonviolence for decades and paid with their kneecaps in a sniper scope. Like that's the thing that no one wants to talk about. Any of this stuff, whenever it comes up to talk about October 7th and how that was the beginning. Oh, they started a war on October 7th, and you get what you fuck around and find out, and that's the result. Don't start a war that you're going to end up losing. When Palestinians did try nonviolently for generations, and they gave all the speeches, and they worked within all these big international institutions, and they marched nonviolently and protested and did everything, all these nonviolent things that we talk about. And that's the result is more apartheid, more genocide, more violence. Even in the Great March of Return, which is a nonviolent protest, you had people being targeted by snipers, unarmed people being targeted by snipers, murdered, deliberately maimed. Look what's happening in Lebanon. Their army and state doesn't fight back. Only Hezbollah does. And in fact, the state in Lebanon is like, no, Hezbollah needs to stop. The state is just like, Hezbollah needs to disarm and pull back so Israel can just invade our country. That's what the actual like state in Lebanon is saying right now. While Israel is like fully doing a ground invasion of Lebanon and bombing residential neighborhoods in Beirut. As far as the dialogue has come, I still don't think Americans broadly are ready to hear that IMO correct assessment of Hamas. I mean, after a certain point, you have to, I think, hope that people are going to come to you, whether they're ready to hear it or not, whether they're ready to hear that message or not. It's a basic question. Do you support people's right to resist using armed struggle when they're being occupied, which international law explicitly says people have the right to do? Everyone likes to ignore that even for Gandhi and King, there was violence. It's the same dissonance over Mandela and the ANC. Not to mention, Gandhi and King were both assassinated. Their stances all support one thing, U.S. imperialism. That's the ultimate unifier behind all these positions. If you did, like I say, it's incoherent, but it actually is quite coherent because that is the signifier. And about Taiwan especially, like we've got to arm Taiwan. We've got to agree to sending arms to Taiwan in case this moment comes. We have to do it. If they get invaded, we have to do it. No, you don't. America doesn't, again, these are people that are supposed to be on the left. They're supposed to be progressive. And they want to say, oh, I have this progressive foreign policy. You're the country, America, that has 800 military bases around the world. You're the country, America, that has committed 7 different Holocausts since 1950. No, you don't have to do shit. There's no situation where America should be the world police or the good guys that protect the little guy that's being invaded or do this or that. No, you do not. America has no moral high ground whatsoever. America is objectively the most violent country, the most violent and murderous country in modern history. I have this progressive foreign policy, you see, where America goes back to being the good guys. And we use our military might and our military industrial complex for good reasons. And then we arm all these like struggling people that are forced to defend themselves. No, you do not. That's your progressive foreign policy. Progressive foreign policy is recognizing the evils of America. Progressive foreign policy is recognizing correctly that America is the great Satan that the Iranians were actually cooking when they came up with that. We don't even need to sell it as America is evil. We just need people to get into the mind your own business mindset. Yeah, I mean, even if you don't want to go on like America rant when someone asks you a question about Taiwan and you're trying to position yourself as like a progressive tastemaker or a politician, you can absolutely say that's none of our business. What's wrong with that? What's wrong with saying that? How about just America has tried? Here's my version of like the progressive, like politically correct answer. America has tried throughout the years to support people's independence and sovereignty, and it just seems like we always make these situations worse. So I'm taking a different view of this, and I think in these situations, we should try and mind our own business and focus more on what's happening domestically in this country, and then we can have a diplomatic conversation to other nations about their human rights situations and their foreign policy, and we can come to some kind of like diplomatic solution. That would be my like progressive, politically correct answer to that kind of question. Which, yeah, and I think 90% of Americans, or like a large chunk of Americans, would agree with that. Like that's one of the central drivers of MAGA in the first place is Trump himself saying we shouldn't be doing all these foreign wars. Like people are like, thank you, yes, I agree. And then Trump's out there starting more wars and being like, we were weeks away from nuclear holocaust, trying to sell people on this idea that Iran poses some imminent nuclear threat to not just Israel, but the United States as well. And his own fans are leaving the movement in droves, losing their fucking minds at this betrayal. And what are our progressive politicians doing? They're being like, no, we need to actually go further. We need more war. Like, are people fucking stupid? It's crazy. And I think specifically talking about Kat Abu-Ghazaleh, it's the Matt Dussification. That's as progressive you can be, as progressive as you can be in the foreign policy world. And I think if it wasn't him that wrote Kat's foreign policy planks, but it was someone from that school of thought. And like, this just needs to be left in the fucking dust. It's useless. It's useless. And then she lost, you know? So it's like, what do you gain from even moderating your position on this and trying to make people comfortable? What do you gain? You gain nothing. You lose anyways, and AIPAC still came after you. That was the crazy thing about Kat's whole position on this, is that she was going farther. She was going farther than most like centrist Democrats on these things, which just makes no sense. And also at a certain point, there's things that are more important than winning and holding political office. It's called taking a actually moral standpoint and having an actual moral framework and having principles, you know, not principles that change depending on whether you're running for a race or who you're talking to. Principles like, I don't support NATO. I'm on the left. It used to be not controversial when you're on any remotely even on the left to be like, no, I don't support NATO. And now somehow there's this whole segment of people that are on the left that are like, we need more. We need to arm NATO even more. We need to fund NATO more. We need to send more weapons to these groups because Russia bad. It's crazy. She also could have gotten away with, hey, I'm running for Congress, not president. I think she made a mistake overall in wandering into those waters so much in the first place. That's a good point. Like, I mean, why the fuck does she have a Taiwan policy plank on her campaign materials when you're running for Congress in Illinois? Why do you need to have a Taiwan position in that case? Genuine question. Shouldn't we support groups that don't want to lose their sovereignty to their much larger, more powerful neighbors? Here's where I think we get tripped up when we talk about this sometimes, is we convince ourselves that people like Taiwan, for example, right now has sovereignty. And if they got folded into China or so, they wouldn't have sovereignty. And I think it's more complex than that. And this is what becomes tricky to talk about. Same with Ukraine. The idea that Ukraine was sovereign and then they get invaded by Russia and their sovereignty is threatened. These places are U.S. military outposts, right? These places are used as proxies to destabilize, encircle, and threaten America's enemies. I fully believe Ukrainians have been caught in the middle of a situation where they've been used as cannon fodder to destabilize Russia and to draw Russia into some kind of quagmire. And America was pumping arms into eastern Ukraine for years and years and years. There was multiple efforts to do a peace process. It didn't work out. And this was by design. This was so those people, those Ukrainians, would get on the front lines and kill Russians. And that eventually, if some kind of conflict broke out, and of course all the people in NATO and the United States government were saying, don't worry, if a war breaks out, if they invade, we're going to take care of you. We're going to give you every weapon that you need. We're going to make sure that we defend. And then like that happens, right? The invasion actually does happen. And Ukrainians have been completely caught in the middle and been completely fucked. And meanwhile, all these American corporations are moving into Ukraine while that's going on and privatizing everything, signing big deals to get resources. So my point is that these places don't actually have sovereignty to begin with. That's my point. It's not that like, oh, they're sovereign or not sovereign, or we need to give them weapons to protect their sovereignty. They're not sovereign in the first place because they're being used by these Western interests to destabilize their enemies. And they're being used as cannon fodder. And the people that are sending arms to Ukraine, and it couldn't be more clear now. If it was like, I think it was clear before, but it couldn't be more clear now. Look at Zelensky. He's standing with the West against Iran. Like he's standing with Israel when people try to make this connection between like Palestine and Ukraine, when Ukraine's being armed by the West and Israel's being armed by the West and Taiwan's being armed by the West. So it couldn't be more clear now. But I think the people that advocate for arming Ukraine and engaging in this proxy war to fight Russia, no matter what rhetoric they're using, they don't actually care about people's sovereignty, and they never did. They're more than happy to have Ukrainians keep dying and dying and dying because it destabilizes Russia. And I'm sure that they thought if this invasion happened, that Russia they were going to hit them with these sanctions, right? Remember that? Not only are we going to come in and give you all the weapons that you need to fight this war and training and all this stuff, but we're going to hit Russia with all these sanctions. Russia's going to get totally screwed. The people of Russia are going to rise up and overthrow the government. Remember that? Does that sound familiar? Well, none of that happened. None of that actually happened. And now Ukrainians have been dealing with a fucking war for the last 3 years. Hundreds of thousands of people have died. And for what? For nothing. That's my point, is that there's not this situation of like, oh, they're sovereign and we need to protect their sovereignty. They're not sovereign because they're being used as proxies by Western interests. And the people that are using them don't care about their human rights and they don't care about their sovereignty. That's my progressive foreign policy. And that is why I think if you're someone that's running to be part of this political machine, you want to talk about Palestinian human rights, and you want to talk about all these things to give your like progressive bona fides, and then you go and talk about foreign policy, and you're like, we need to arm Ukraine, we need to arm Taiwan, and we need to not arm Palestine. We need to not arm Palestinians. You sound like an asshole. Sorry to say. But I think if we're going to talk about this, if you're going to try to be part of this machine, we got to get serious. So, but even AOC the other day, like I was saying, she was in Munich and she was asked about Taiwan. And what did she say? Oh, I think well, and she just can't give an answer. And then she ended up spitting out an answer. And her answer was, we should take every single step diplomatically to ensure that that didn't happen, which, okay, fine. But one thing that she decidedly did not say was, we have nothing to do with that. That's not our business. And that to me is progressive foreign policy, if you're going to talk about this. No, we should not be arming Taiwan. It's easy, actually. It's easy to say. In this hypothetical scenario where China invades Taiwan, no, we should not arm Taiwan. Easy. I just have a natural soft spot for foreign communities who feel afraid of the world superpower they grew up under and barely managed to express that past an unknown amount of communication barriers. I'm aware these are predominantly just feelings that maybe make me give the benefit of the doubt more than I should, but it's why, sadly, I don't expect most geopolitics to be common knowledge. Well, the thing is, I have a soft spot for some of this as well. And I think sometimes we do lose sight of that. Like, yeah, I can understand why someone living in Ukraine might have certain feelings about Russia, whether I think that's justified or not. I'm sure that there's plenty of like fully democratic support for Ukrainian independence or Ukraine joining NATO or Ukraine being part of Europe and Ukraine. I recognize that that's quite possibly true. And I understand why people might feel that way. But also, just because people democratically believe a whole lot of things. It doesn't mean that I have to agree with it, even if I might have sympathy for people. Like I said, no one has gotten screwed over more in this process than Ukrainians. I don't think it's helpful to take this like stance where like all Ukrainians are Nazis, all Ukrainians are bad, and Russia is good. No, that's a ridiculous way of framing that. I have a huge amount of sympathy for Ukrainians because I feel like they've gotten completely fucked. But what the people have been too afraid to admit is that regardless of your feelings of Russia, Western countries, America, Canada is deeply involved in this as well because of our long history with the Ukrainian immigrants and the Ukrainian diaspora. Canada was very involved in arming and training some of these neo-Nazi groups, which has been well documented before it became illegal to talk about. No one wants to admit that these Western countries poured gasoline on that fire and until it exploded into the invasion that happened. And all this talk about like, oh, the unprovoked. That was one thing, Chomsky's canceled now because of his connections with Epstein, which makes sense. But one thing Chomsky was saying over the last couple of years, which is something that I happen to agree with, which is that the media keeps saying unprovoked invasion, unprovoked invasion, unprovoked invasion. And the more that they say that, the more you know it was not unprovoked. And that's been my basic stance when we talk about this. Not that Russia is good or can do no wrong or that I agree with every single thing that Russia does, which is not true. But that we played a role in creating the situation. There was a border war going on for like 8 years before the invasion. Yeah, and America and Canada were dumping weapons into it. Like, what the fuck did they think was going to happen? And I'll tell you what they thought was going to happen. Exactly what happened. And again, that's what it comes down to. Is that I think if someone's going to try to be part of this political machine in whatever country, we can't let them get away with this like progressive foreign policy that still is ultimately a slightly nicer version of imperialism and Zionism. We can and should do better than that. And one of the things is also this whole idea that like, oh, you can't criticize, but look at all these positions that this person has. Look at all these important positions on these domestic issues and healthcare and all this stuff. So we can't criticize. No, we should. That's the person that we should criticize the most. The MAGA people, they don't want to work with us. They don't want to hear from us. The liberals don't want to hear from us. The people that will listen to us are people that are trying to run on this progressive platform because they need us. They need us to win. Reactionaries and conservatives, they don't need us. Liberals will openly brag about how they don't need us. These people that are positioning themselves as progressives do need to be asked this question. And they will respond to this pressure. And people need to be held accountable if you're going to position yourself as being part of this political tradition. But then you're going to be squishy on whether or not we should support NATO. You're going to be squishy on whether we should start a major conflict with China over Taiwan. That's not acceptable. And like I showed with that clip with Ro Khanna, you literally can't because you sound like a fucking asshole. You can't say, I support giving weapons to Ukraine, but when it comes to Palestinians, oh, I just believe in the nonviolent tradition like Gandhi and Martin Luther King. I'm sorry, it just doesn't make sense. Even if you don't want to say that we should be arming the Palestinians, which we should, that should be the left position. You're going to say, oh, the people that have been doing the fighting should throw down their weapons and I'll just leave. And this is another aspect of this right now with this Iranian war that's going on right now, which is what I consider to be an incoherent position from a lot of people that I'm close with, that I'm friends with, that I agree with a lot of things that they say. But this whole idea of like, I support Palestinians. I'm against Israel. I'm anti-Zionist. I support Palestinians. And I also do not support any of these resistance groups that have been the actual people doing the actual fighting against Israel. Iran and Hezbollah, the Ansar Allah, Hamas, and these resistance groups. And being like, I support Palestinians, but I also support doing regime change in Iran, the only actual nation that's been funding these proxies that have been fighting back at all against these Zionist forces. That doesn't make sense at all. I support Palestinians and I also support regime change in the one country that's remotely doing anything whatsoever to actually provide for not just like words of encouragement, but actual armed struggle from people that are being genocided, people that are being invaded in Lebanon. It just doesn't make sense. And your feelings about Iran and what's going on in Iran are completely irrelevant to that. I wouldn't call them proxies. I feel like that's what the West wants us to think they are. Yeah, okay, well, I'm using it as a kind of shorthand because I agree actually that that's something that we should push back on because there's this idea that like Ansar Allah or Hezbollah or Hamas are just taking orders from Iran and Iran gives orders and tells them what to do, and then they do it, which is not the case. I'm talking about the fact that like Iran does help fund these groups and arm them, but they're not proxies in the way that a lot of groups are proxies for Western power that do have the shots called by powerful Western countries in America. Yeah, that's how we treat our proxies. So that's a good point. That's a good point, because I think that's worth pushing back on as well. The idea that any of these groups are just like doing Iran's bidding. But they also, I don't want to say they wouldn't exist without Iran, but Iran does fund these groups. Elected Dems keep saying, but Iran is evil, but our government also uses the death penalty. I'm going to go, I don't know if people are going to find this controversial, okay? Again, I think your feelings about the Iranian government don't really matter. The United States government is objectively far more evil than Iran, no matter what you want to say about Iran. Let's compare body counts. Let's look at the conditions of the US prison system, not just the growing network of like migrant concentration camps where people are dying every single day. Just the plain old US prison system right now. The number of people in there, the conditions that they're suffering under, how they ended up there, and look at what America does around the world. And we're really going to say like, but Iran is evil. Iran does all these terrible things. The US is objectively, using any metric you want to look at, far more evil than anything you can accuse Iran of.